I'll call this meeting the Finance and Labor Relations Subcommittee to order. Item 2, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. 3, delegations, none scheduled. Item 4, report of Stratford Economic Development Corporation, Economic Enterprise Development Corporation. Can I get a motion to hear from Joni? Moved by Councilor Ritzma. All those in favor? That's carried. I think Brad may be frozen. Oh, there you go. Joni, you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm having glitchy internet as well. So if I freeze, please let me know. And I'm also going to attempt to share my screen. So that's 2 very important technological advancements for me, but just bear with me. We'll see if I can get this to happen. I'm left to my own devices. Okay. Can you see a slide that says Finance and Labor Relations Subcommittee?
Yes.
Well, if I do nothing else, I've won the day. So thank you very much to the committee for having SeedCo give you an update on what we've been up to. I do want to highlight a number of things and also preface by saying that this is the first report that we've created based on the service agreement that Stratford City Council and the SeedCo board entered into late in 2021. So it is a robust report, lots of metrics, and is meant to highlight the quarter that was in terms of the activities and also give this committee an idea of what's to come. So in terms of our key metrics, from October 1st through December 31st of 2021, you'll see there we have 40 ongoing new investment opportunities for both city-owned and privately held industrial and commercial properties. We define an ongoing investment opportunity as more than just an inquiry. So this is an inquiry that has received feedback from us in terms of whether land that's available or not, connections to other appropriate privately held landowners, and ongoing dialogue. So this is sort of a second level of lead nurturing, if you will. In addition to that, 18 startup small businesses were supported by the Small Business Center. Those are companies that are new and looking to begin their organizations in Stratford, St. Mary's, and Perth County. We had 1 site visit from a company coming to this area. That's sort of the highlight, if you will, of lead generation of any description. When a company comes to the area to physically see what you have to offer, that's incredibly important. They've made the commitment and the investment in the time and effort to come here. We are supporting 34 existing companies. This is through retention and expansion efforts. Generally speaking, this is through our work with the Small Business Enterprise Center. For the most part, most of the larger organizations, manufacturing, industrial, commercial, when they're being sort of retained and expanded, it's because they're growing on their existing footprint. So it is a blend. We hosted 4 workshops and events for small businesses and entrepreneurs. We did 16 different workforce development activities and directly supported 2 employer consultations. And in terms of the events and conferences that we've attended, the APMA conference was hosted in person. There were various automotive, cybersecurity, autonomous and electric vehicle companies in attendance. As you can see there, all city-owned industrial land is either sold or in reserve, and 2 parcels closed in Q4, totaling just over $430,000 in land sale revenue. In terms of our budget, this is something that's a little bit new for us, reporting on a more frequent basis. We have some variance that I wanted to just highlight there for you. Our small business and some successes and highlights, if I may. Our Small Business Center funding is confirmed through March 31st, 2024, with an option to extend a 3rd year. That's $217,806 to be exact. This is reflected in the current budget. It is an ongoing project. The contract does expire in March. And so as every special project does, there's always a little bit of trepidation that the projects won't move forward and there'll be some changes. And I'm pleased to let the committee know that the province will fund that activity for another 2+ years. And this at a 0% increase, but there are no cutbacks. This is, I like to let you know about this because this is the funding that provides council and through to SeedCo the opportunity to grant money into our businesses. So this is summer company for our young entrepreneurs and starter company for our startup organizations. So knowing that funding is solid for the next 2 years is a real big win for our businesses in this area. Our My Main Street program funding is confirmed through February 28th, 2023. That's $115,000. Now, I wanted to bring this to your attention. It's not reflected in our current budget because we didn't know we would be approved for it when our budgets were submitted, but there is no net impact to city funding as a result of this project. So we're not going to need anything else. We're not going to need any less because it's a matching program. My Main Street provides 2 Main Street ambassadors, and those teammates have joined the SeedCo team. And it is a partnership with the town of St. Mary's. So there will be an ambassador in St. Mary's and an ambassador in Stratford, working directly with the BIAs in both communities to bring support and programming directly to the companies and the small businesses that are in the catchment areas of both of those BIAs. And finally, our Can Export community investment funding was confirmed through December 31st of this year, just over $9,000. It is not reflected in our current budget, but there is no impact to city funding. So not asking for anything extra, not asking for any less. This is the money that the federal government provides SeedCo to match projects where we go into other countries and look to attract investment back into Stratford. So it's a 50-50 match, and the focus on our activities in 2022, fingers crossed all things COVID goes by the wayside, will be on the UK, Germany, and to do a bit of work with our companies in Japan. In terms of the budget you have in front of you, just one variance I wanted to bring to your attention. The reason our memberships are as high as they are in January, because the budget part is a little awkward, I know, because it's the month of January, but our activities were for the quarter before. We'll get all of that caught up as we move through the year. But our Southwestern Ontario Marketing Alliance and our EDCO Economic Development Committee of Ontario, all of those memberships that are annual are paid at the beginning of the year. So we're not going to go over or have a significant variance in that budget line through the year. It's just that they all come due in January, so they're paid in advance. So that is the one variance there for you. We do have some attainable housing projects, and I'll look forward to being able to provide the subcommittee a more fulsome update on that at the next meeting when we've dotted some I's and crossed some T's. But that project is set to begin in quarter 1 and 2 of 2022. So we'll start to see activity there sort of March, April of this year. And I also wanted to let you know that all SBEC related expenses, and that includes our rent, grants, and events, are reported on a fiscal year end April to March. So you'll, over the course of this year, see some variances in those 2 categories as well. And finally, looking ahead, because I always like to look ahead to quarter 1, we're going to put $40,000 of starter company grants into 8 local startup companies. So congratulations to those companies and to all the hard work that they're putting together and getting their businesses opened. I can let you know that we did attend our first trade show with our Southwestern Ontario Marketing Alliance partners, and it was the International Building Supply Show. It was in February, the 7th, the 10th. It's looking ahead because that's when the report was due, but yes, I've already been there, so I'm not, a fortune teller or anything, but it was an excellent show. I can tell you that COVID restrictions are very interesting in the US right now, but I came back safe and sound, met with 8 different companies, all with an awareness of where Ontario is, with an awareness of where the Southwestern Ontario market is, and a keen interest in expansion. So really, really positive. I'm glad to be getting back to those one-on-one and in-person meetings. I will moderate the Stratford and Area Builders Association annual luncheon on attainable housing this week. If you don't have your ticket, please sign up. What they've done this year in lieu of an in-person event is any member who signs up will receive and attends will receive a downtown dollar for the community of their choice. So I think it's St. Mary's, Mitchell, and Stratford, so that you can invest that money back into local restaurateurs in our community. And this year we will celebrate International Women's Day. We're going to do it a little differently. We're all a little Zoom event COVID fatigued. So we're going to do a series of articles on local female business leaders through the month of March. And so you'll see those in all of our social channels. We're going to work with the radio station and the newspaper as well to really highlight some wonderful female professionals and entrepreneurs in the Stratford and area community. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, and happy to answer any questions anyone may have. And stop sharing.
Thanks, Joni. Does anybody have any questions? See none. Would someone like to make the motion to receive the report for information? Okay. Both, everybody looks like they're frozen. So I don't know if anybody actually put up their hand. Oh, I saw Martin move. Not very much. If anybody
Can
could say,
you hear me, Chair?
yes, I can hear you.
May I ask a question? I had my hand up, but I don't know if you can see us. So.
I could not.
Okay, so Ms. Gerber, if I may, and this might be jumping ahead a wee bit. With regards to the attainable housing work, are there partners that you are currently working with at this time that you can share, or if you want to wait, I understand as well, but go ahead.
Yes, so through the chair, thank you for that question. The short answer is yes, there are partners that are sort of helping to influence the work that we're doing. The city has an internal working group as well that's meeting actually tomorrow. And there are some funding components to this that I'm going to reserve to tell you about at the next meeting, because we're just making sure that those are confirmed. But absolutely, the more the merrier at that table for sure. And when it comes to matching dollars, I'm hoping to have something for you to celebrate with me at the next meeting.
Thank you.
I also had a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilor Clifford.
Tony, I was going to ask out of curiosity, in your report, you talk about 40 ongoing true investments. What percentage, like that's a lot of, what percentage do you hope to, or is that impossible to tell? But it's in your report, so I'm going to ask.
No, it's a great question. It is, and it is a lot. We're anywhere from 3 to 4 new leads a week. Some are fishing and some are really interested specifically in Stratford. I would be remiss if I didn't say the lack of available land, and not just ours, the lack of available space to lease is really what is limiting immediate investment. Our surrounding neighbors are experiencing the same kind of inventory issues. So I'm not concerned that, we're going to lose somebody immediately to a surrounding neighboring community. I think the length of time to actually invest is what's going to take long. Let's be honest, if we get 25% of these, I'm happy. Right now, they're all, we qualify these as being very serious. I don't want to use the word very, reasonably serious leads, in that the dialogue is ongoing. Normally, when we send an introductory package, if we don't always hear back, and often site selectors are doing due diligence. So as an example, they're going to invest with Councillor Clifford, but they're going to check with Councillors Bunting, Beattie, and Ritzma to make sure they're getting a good deal. In this particular case, I think, about 25 to 30% of them would put shovels in the ground or bring their facility here if they had walls and a ceiling to do so.
Thank you, Joni. I need Brad and Graham to acknowledge that they can hear me, because
I can hear you, Dave.
Okay, thanks, Brad.
Yeah. I can hear you too.
Okay, I can see you, but you're both frozen while Graham's starting to move again. So if there's no other questions, I will ask again for a motion to receive the report from CEDCO.
I'll make that motion, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's carried. I'll move on to item 5. And if the clerk will allow me, I'll also ask for both item 5 and item 6 to be motioned at the same time. So if I get somebody to
So
make a
moved.
motion,
So moved, Counselor Ritzma.
Counselor Ritzma, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, Allison, if you're prepared to make your presentation and if you're prepared for moral support, you go right ahead whenever you're ready.
Perfect, thanks. So I'm just going to give a really high level look at our financials for the year ended December 31st, 2021 for both FHI and FHSI. If you have specific questions that I don't touch on, feel free to ask anything. The one thing I wanted to caveat with first is that these are preliminary year-end statements. So we prepared them at the end of January for both of our board meetings that happened in the first week of February. So they are unaudited at this point, and so still subject to change before you see the final results at the meeting in May. On the FHI side, our net income for the year, just over $2 million, 2.12, which is just slightly below budget, but well ahead of projections. We did projections for our board meetings in October. So very happy to see kind of those results at the end of the year. We did make up a good portion of the income tax expense that I've been speaking about throughout the year on the interest penalty of the disallowed shareholder interest. So happy to see that we've been able to recover most of that expense so far this year. From a balance sheet perspective, the only couple of things I really wanted to highlight, our accounts receivable balance is higher than it was at the end of last year. And that is mainly due to some recoverable work. So some larger non-hydro costs. So that would be more of our contract provider recoverable work at the end of the year. The other piece for electric, water, sewer receivables, the balance is higher, but the majority of that is current balances. Our past due receivables are significantly lower, 216,000 lower than they were in 2020. So that's a really positive thing that has come out of this year. We've been able to catch most of the customers up from an arrears perspective. And we are currently in a disconnection moratorium. This has been going on for the past several years, where we are, as the hydro, not allowed to disconnect customers for non-payment, but we do always work with customers to try to make sure that we're trying to figure out some payment plans so that when the spring does come up, there aren't substantial amounts of disconnections that we have to go through. So we're always working with customers and trying to get them on some payment plans. The other item that I wanted to highlight on the balance sheet is the bank indebtedness number. We are just below a break-even point for the year, which if you've seen previous years, that was in a larger balance. So we are on track to in 2022 be at a break-even cash flow perspective, which is a good spot to be in. You don't want to have too much cash or else you're losing at this point based on inflation being so high and some other items. So we're definitely trying to target for that break-even cash flow perspective. So we got fairly close to that at the end of the year. From an income statement perspective, distribution revenues were below budget and below projections. And the main reason for that, slightly complicated component, but it's basically something called LRAM. So for CDM conservation programs that have been going on for several years, we did get some revenue back through those programs. That has completed with those programs have been complete. And so we won't see those savings that we've seen in previous years, and that those were budgeted for, although that we did know that the projects were ending. So the actual distribution revenue, so customer account revenues were fairly close to on budget, which is a good thing. We've recovered well from the pandemic. We're seeing some growth in the residential rate classes, and the small business rate classes we're doing fairly well as well, and just slightly below budget on the larger customers, but fairly good coming out of a major pandemic year. On the expense side, similar things you've heard from me in the last several meetings. We were low on operating and maintenance costs, mainly due to some staffing levels in our operations departments and metering. And then as well, the administrative costs, again, due to staffing, some VP vacancies, CEO vacancies, things like that. So those should rebound back to more normal stable spaces in 2022. And again, just to note that we are on side with all of our loan covenant ratios for all of our debt through RBC. Are there any questions on FHI first before we move to the other? Seeing none, I'll move to the next one, and if there are more questions, you can let me know. So if I move to Rhizome, again, these are preliminary year-end statements. So again, subject to change depending on the audit. Our net income for the period was 113,000, 17,000 ahead of budget, and just slightly 8,000 under our projections that we had in October. The main things I wanted to comment on the balance sheet, our capital asset additions were down compared to budget throughout the year. And I think that's the same comment I've made the last several meetings as well. The main things due to less maintenance required. Also, some of the items that we did plan for specifically around the fiber capital are based on expansion costs mainly through Whiteman. So they would let us know when work needed to be done, and they don't have as much work needed in 2021, and we plan that project that going forward into 2022 as well. The major areas where we are spending some capital dollars surround our cybersecurity networks, some heat mapping software. So when outages do occur, we are able to find those and have some stabilization quicker. And then also some servers and some backup pieces of equipment for Wi-Fi. So when some of those items go down, we have those backups available and are ready to implement right away so that the outages are shorter. So those are the main things on the capital and balance sheet side. From an income statement spot, we are lower than budget. Again, these are similar things you've heard from me in the past, but the main items are some decreased growth in what was expected on our Wi-Fi and ISP revenues, and also our consulting revenues. Again, this was mainly due to staffing. We were low. We had a vacancy twice throughout the year, so the corresponding revenue, but also the costs were also lower on the staffing and consulting revenues. We also are lower on our co-locate for our IT building. We didn't see as much growth as we expected, but hoping to get that in place for 2022. And that's pretty much where we stand on the FHSI side as well. So if there are, again, specific questions, let me know and I can answer them.
Does anybody have any questions for Allison?
If I may, through the chair.
Councilor Ritzma?
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering, you had just mentioned the decreased growth. Is there a chance as we move along to recover some of that growth that we missed out on?
Yes, there is. As part of the strategic plan going forward, we're looking at targeting some markets where we think the best growth is. So certainly on the data center side, trying to uncover some more customers or expand our existing customer occupancy or presence within the data center. And then always looking at our dark fiber and ISP services and trying to expand those markets as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I can't see hands, so if anybody has a question, speak up. See none, could I get someone to make a motion to accept the reports for both Festival Hydro Inc. and Festival Hydro?
I will, Mr. Chair, Councilor Clifford.
Councilor Clifford? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think that was everybody. Okay, thanks, Allison and Jeff. Appreciate your report. We'll move on to item 7, report of the Acting Director of Corporate Services, 7.1. Ontario Regulation 28409, excluded expenses. Carmen, go ahead.
Through the chair. This is a regulatory report we're required to remit when we, because the city budgets, like most municipalities, on a partial accrual basis, not a full accrual basis. This just highlights some of the adjustments that are made or that we have to make as a result of financial accounting under the public sector accounting rules. So it's just to highlight several of the areas. So the specific areas that we're required to report on include amortization expenses on tangible capital assets, post-employment benefits expenses, and solid waste landfill closure costs. So we actually take an approach at the City of Stratford for a couple of these items to partially accrue or partially budget for some of these expenses, but certainly the very first one, the amortization expense, we do not. So at the end of the year, essentially what has to happen is our financial information that we do budget for includes transfers to the reserves for our capital projects. Those items get removed from our financial accounting and amortization expense gets inserted instead. So that one kind of offsets itself. We aren't quite budgeting enough from a replacement cost standpoint, as you've heard through the budget process, but certainly from a historical cost or I'll say consumption of our assets, we're doing a reasonable job in that regard. So that's that piece of it. Our post-employment benefits expenses and our solid waste closure, we've just nicely started to budget for the solid waste landfill closure costs. So there was a small item, I want to say it was under $50,000 put into the 2022 budget to start setting money aside for those costs. And then the post-employment benefits, we also include some funding for that, but it's certainly not the full extent of our future liability. So these are the 3 areas that we're required to report on in this regulation. And then part of the analysis is to identify what the impact would be if we were to include those in our budget and how that would impact our process. So essentially, because we do partial on some of the stuff, it's really just an impact relating to the adjustments that are not budgeted. And the way that we estimate that is to look at the prior year impacts for those and try to project any future impacts. So with respect to the 2022 budget. So we're coming up, I came up with an estimate of about $12 million that basically we don't budget for, but that ends up affecting our bottom line on our audited financial statements. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any on that part of things.
Does anybody have any questions on that? Hearing nor seeing anyone make a move on that. Could I get someone to move the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Chair.
Councilor Ritzma.
Councilor Ritzman, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries. Item 7.2, development charges deferral payment plan and rate freeze interest rates. Carmen?
Thank you, through the chair. So this one's a new policy and a new concept for most of us. There were some changes to the Planning Act that allow developers now within the Act to enter into agreements with municipalities to stagger or defer their payment of their development charges. So this applies to sort of the larger, usually the larger developments. And so this policy we felt was necessary because while the Act requires municipalities to enter into these types of agreements. It does not prescribe, nor does it really comment on how we would treat that from an interest rate perspective, and how the municipality should or could or might recover some costs of money for those periods. So this is just a bit of a background on here, submitted through the report to give that history. And then the proposed policy is such that, we're recognizing that, we'd like to attract development with respect to coming up with housing and rental units and specific types of development. So we're proposing that those types of developments, if they're deferred, and the developers do have the choice, they don't have to do this. If they're deferred, that they would be at a 0% interest rate. And if they weren't rental unit types of development, that we would look at a Bank of Canada prime rate plus 2% markup. So that's kind of the proposed policy. Again, we haven't so far seen this, even though this ability to do this came into play in 2000. Was that an adjustment back in the plan? I will say 2020. And so, but we are expecting that we will start to see this as some of our newer developments and our queries come online with existing developers. They're starting to ask the question. So that's why this is in front of you now. And again, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Question through the chair.
Yes, Councilor Ritzman.
Just with your work on this thus far, municipalities that are similar to ours, maybe geographically and in size, any idea of what those municipalities are doing with regards to this piece?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for the question through the chair. I did do a little bit of research and sort of determining what, like a lot of municipalities aren't quite there yet. They don't have this policy necessarily in place, but the ones that do have taken a bit of it's a varied approach as far as how they're determining the interest rate. I did speak with one a municipality up in my neck of the woods in Grey County, and they had developed this policy a year and a half ago when the legislation first came out, and had opted for a fixed rate interest rate, but have since then determined that they are now exposed if interest rates go up. So they are looking at modifying their policy to go with a floating rate. I've seen anywhere from prime +1 to prime +3. And just in speaking sort of thinking about some of the indices options that we could have used to link it to besides prime, I struggled with this a little one because the construction indices typically have a higher rate of inflation or a higher cost of growth, but it's really comes down to the cost of money. And so the way that I sort of viewed it is that if we were to have to go out and borrow money, we probably wouldn't have to pay prime +2, but a developer probably would. So it's just to try to ensure that we're not acting on behalf of developers as bankers, but at the same time are able to offer them some reasonable alternative to their financial institution if they so choose.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question? Seeing none, could I get someone to make the motion?
I'll do that.
Councilor Bunting, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's carried. Item 7.3, reserves and reserve funds review. Carmen?
So this one actually came out as a result of some analysis through our budget process as well, where we're trying to establish or make sure that our reserves in general are consistent with our financial forecasting and our capital planning. And it did come to light that the housing and social services reserves were, I'll say, disproportionately split back when they were first amalgamated or created in 2017 and 2018. So again, it appears we don't have a lot of, I'll say, background paper on it, but it appears that the split was really essentially a 50-50 split between the balances that existed for housing and the balances existed for social services. There were several reserves that were consolidated and then just cut in half. And we just felt that after reviewing this, that there was not a like that arbitrary method didn't represent what the funds were originally intended for or what they were originally derived from. So staff have done an analysis to suggest that rather than a 50-50 split, that we're looking at approximately 2.5 million out of the 3 million in a social services reserve, where it's really kind of, I'll say, not allocated. It consists of surpluses or unspent grants that do not have to be returned to the province, any kind of residual revenues that existed for the division, unspent capital, that sort of thing. Unspent transfers to reserves for capital purposes. The remaining balance of the 500,000, we're suggesting that it be split to better reflect the nature of the funds. Now, included in that $500,000 is a small portion that we call the home ownership loan program. So this is one where the city offers qualified candidates a home ownership loan for the deposit for their purchase of their house. It's repayable over a period of time. I think it's 10 years is the average amount, and the average amount of the loans are, anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 each. So there are several of them out there with a balance right now of 95,000. So we felt that was better reflected in its own reserve, so that its repayments and lending activities could be tracked a little more easily and separated from the other activity within those groups. And then the balance of the $419,000 would be for the housing division. So that's really relating to the local housing corporation. That's the Perth Stratford Housing. So that's the gist of the report. We're just trying to, I'll say, reallocate those balances to the appropriate usages, and it doesn't have any real significant impact other than it does better reflect how much funds are available for social services general capital purposes, and that doesn't have them tied up in the wrong place. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if I explained that well at all, but certainly if there's any questions, I can try to get into that further.
Okay, thanks, Carmen. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. It isn't specific on this one, but Carmen, I think you found the problem here. Are you planning to review the other reserves? Because it seems to me we haven't done that for a while. So I know that's not specifically on this, but I do have a concern.
That's a great question. Thank you, Councillor Clifford. Yes, it is part of the process that I've been trying to do it a little bit piecemeal since I started with the city back in September. And I would like to do a more comprehensive approach to it. There are, like, from what I can tell, most of the reserves are specific to like very specific purposes. They're either transportation capital, they're transit capital, they have their very specific use and they came that way. But this one it was just a little bit unique in how it was derived. But yes, to answer your question, I do want to do a more comprehensive review of it. It's just to get some time to dedicate to that after the budget and the year ends are completed.
Okay, I had a question also, and it's again, it's not specific, and I'm not sure if it dovetails with what Councillor Clifford asked, but I thought of this when I was in Upper Queens Park on Saturday in a winter storm to attend the unveiling of our new fire truck. And I was thinking about fire trucks and capital and other things that we know we're going to have to replace on a fairly regular basis. And I guess my question goes to, we know that this fire truck costs $2 million. In 30 years, when we have to replace this fire truck, it's probably going to cost somewhere in the $3 million, $2.5 to $3 million range. Can we be saying moving forward here that every year for the next 30 years, the fire budget should include $100,000 in reserve specifically to buy that piece of equipment. And we say to our fleet manager, or we say to whoever's in charge of things like that in other departments, you know you're going to need a new pickup truck. We're buying you a pickup truck this year, and you know in 5 years you're going to want a new pickup truck. For every year for the next 5 years, we want you to include in your budget $15,000 or $20,000 in reserve specifically to replace that truck, or a scissor lift, or a front end loader, or a dump truck, or a street sweeper, or a portable garbage truck, or any one of those things that aren't buildings. And I think as far as, well, buildings are a whole different kettle of fish. Can we, like, is that an acceptable way of approaching our budgeting forward here? Because it's things like buying a fire truck, you know, bites us when all of a sudden 1 year we're looking for $400,000 and the next year we're looking at 1.6, and we have to go to the bank with our hand out and say, hey, we need this piece of equipment today. So I hope you understand my question.
I think so, Mr. Chair, thank you. And I thank you for the question. It is something that we, you know, from I would say on an asset by asset or a truck by truck basis, I would say we would love to get to that point where we're able to specifically identify those transfers to reserves. One of the challenges that we saw through the budget process is that, you know, we're projecting that we're going to have all of these capital expenditures over the next 10 years, let alone 25 or 20 years, but you know, over the next 10 years, where we've got a funding deficit over the next 10 years of $7 million, pardon me. So, or whatever that number ends up being, it might be 5 million, it might be 10 million, but right now we're sitting there saying it's, you know, between $7 and $9 million. So the challenge remains is that when we come to budget and we make the recommendations for those transfers to those reserves for assets that are that far down the road, it becomes a challenge to balance that, you know, what should we be applying for the tax levy now versus what things can we balance with reserve funding that exists versus what things can we borrow to fund. So it is a bit of an exercise in balance for all those types of options to fund things. And then there's, you know, we throw grants into the mix, and, you know, anywhere that we can lean into those. But certainly, you know, we can do a better job, I would say, as staff going forward when we start to do our budget preparations to link those transfers to reserves to specific assets, if that's what council would like to see, for sure.
And I'd also like to see, I wouldn't want to see, and maybe this is the wrong way of phrasing it, that a department has absolutely generally no reserves, and they come to us and say, I need $1.5 million to buy all this stuff. You know, that's like, to me, that's no way to operate either. So
I agree completely. And, you know, sometimes, you know, we are a little bit of I'll say a victim of historical decisions and, you know, historical things that have happened, but moving forward, that is definitely the financial planning goals that your current treasurer has in place. So.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I have a question. It goes along with that. Carmen, when we're talking about a fire truck and development charges, obviously the reason and I'm talking about this fire truck because it's extra high. And is development charges taken into consideration for the future? And like how do you allocate the development charges as far as like reserves?
So a great question, another great one. Development charges are a bit of a unique beast because by legislation, they're really only eligible to pay for things that are directly related to growth and demonstrably related to growth. So a replacement fire truck does not qualify. Now, if an additional fire truck were required because our services had expanded or you know, somehow our geographic area got bigger or that sort of thing, then definitely. But You'll probably see when we start to get into the discussions in our development charges background studies that are coming up in the next few weeks. There are specific projects that have been identified as growth related versus not growth related. And so there is some connection between projects that council will be aware of in terms of on the horizon for infrastructure, even just land, servicing land costs. But when it comes to things like protection services, recreational services, some of the library services, some of those things, it becomes a little bit more difficult to demonstrate the growth component. It's not so directly linked to development. So we have to build those into our study. So every 6 years when we do a development charges background study, as we're required to do, we will be looking, and we continue to look for potentially areas where we will have to add a service. So if we'll need to add, a new recreation facility as a result of growth, it's that incremental growth where we can capture that, not so much on the replacement of existing.
Thank you, Carmen. Does anybody else have any questions for our acting director?
If I may, through the chair.
Of course.
Thank you. Just so going back to your report then with regards to the reserves and reserve fund review, with this particular report, obviously there must have been discussion with social services and housing with regards to this recommendation, this split being presented.
Yes, through the chair. It was actually kind of a social services employee that had brought it to our attention in finance, because the decision, unfortunately, when the former treasurer had gone and restructured the reserves and reserve funds, by the way, most of all of which I've agreed with so far, this one just didn't have the level of analysis that was required to track those historic balances. And so it was that department that had identified this anomaly, and that was not allocated quite correctly. So I reviewed the analysis and agree, and that's why you're seeing the report now.
Thank you. And to that end, through the chair, I will move the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councilor Ritzma. If there's nothing else, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 And that sounded like it was accepted. So thanks, Carmen. I will move on to the next item, which is the item 8, Advisory Committee and Outside Board Minutes. We've got Stratfords of the World Advisory Committee minutes attached. Item 9, next subcommittee meeting, March 22nd at 3:30 p.m. Speaking of dates, everybody knows today is Tuesday, don't they? 22/2/22. Item 10, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Councilor Beatty, thank you. All those in favor? I guess nobody protected that. Okay, thanks everybody, and stay safe.